wet, cold stuff hit me in the face the other day. It was just one. Was it ice? Was it snow? I don't know. But it was cold. I even had a snowflake on my car dashboard this morning. You know how you get all the dummy lights on a car? Check engine, all these kinds of things. Mine had a snowflake this morning. So warning, it's cold. And it would be great, with all the things that we face, if we had warning lights that would tell us that a storm was about to hit our lives. And we've gone through plenty of storms. If you have just been alive for the last, 5 years. The last 5 years have been crazy with the stuff that we've gone through. And that's just the stuff that makes the news. I was talking with some folks this week, and I was asking them questions about Hawaii and the fires, and they were like, people are still suffering in Hawaii? And then a conversation about the Ukraine war with someone else. Russia and Ukraine are still fighting? Because the headline just constantly changes, right? All the global things, and you can easily get lost in the global things. I've had several people who have said, with all the things happening in the Middle East, Pastor, why aren't you preaching about prophecy right now? I'm like, man, I grew up in a time, when you turned on the news, there was a war in the Middle East. And in other news, the Middle East, wait, it's not news, they're still in conflict. Every time you turned on the TV, there was, when we went to school, we had a few drills. We had a fire drill. Do you guys go to school and have to do a fire drill, how to line up and get out of the building? I don't understand. No one is getting in a straight line if there's a fire in the building. But that's what happens. The teachers will leave the kids behind, So we had fire drills. Makes sense. If you're in a building, you got to get the kids safe. We had tornado drills. Did you guys have tornado drills in school? To where if there's a tornado, you get under your desk. Do you remember get in the hallway, get under your desk so the glass doesn't hit you? Oh, that's because you have inside schools here. We had different tornado drills because our schools had outside hallways. It was they were just whatever, breezeways, yeah. We were, so you got to get away from the glass. Did you have nuclear bomb drills? 26? What's a nuclear bomb? Thank you to one of our teenagers. And I used to sit there as a kid, right? As a kid, and they would tell you, tornado or nuclear bomb, get under your desk. What? If a nuclear bomb went off, your desk is not going to help you. Can we just go watch it? I don't know. I've seen enough movies to go, that's not going to help at all. And those are just things that happen on a big scale. And maybe some of you are looking at life and you're looking at this big scale of things and you're going, man, I'm frightened of some of this stuff. And I don't know what to do about it. And we could go through all the prophetic teaching you want to. It's not going to stop the fear of the headline. For all the conflict that's happening in the world. Volcanoes, earthquakes, wars, bad governments, crooked people, violence. We could talk about all of those things, and it's not going to solve the tensions. I've talked too long. It thinks it's gone to sleep. For all of those tensions, it's not going to solve the problem. But then you get into the stuff that happens in our everyday lives. You lose someone close to you, a spouse, a child, parent. Your relationship separates permanently, divorce is broken. You lose your job, the bill collectors keep calling, bankruptcy's floating around, the IRS is on your back. All sorts of things. And they're there and they're swirling and you're like, what do we do? And so what I want to do for all of the things that we could be facing, I want to take the next 4 weeks and I want to bring us into a space of how we can be anchored on Jesus. How do we find hope in the storm? And so this morning, I want to kick right off at the very top of the page. I don't know that I have control. Do I have control? Or is that you having control? All right, cool. So, point blank, storms come. Storms come. And here's the situation, right? The thing that you think is a storm may not be the thing that I think is a storm. But the things that shake me may not shake you. But for each of us, storms are going to come. I was talking to one of my kids yesterday. They're going through a really hard run at college. And I said, look, here's the thing. You got to be careful right now. I said, here's how life works for your dad. I said, I feel at my absolute loneliest in the middle of heavy crisis. And here's the things that I know to be true. I have a wife who loves me, kids who encourage me and I adore. I have friends. I have a staff that's awesome. I love working with this staff. But when things start getting upside down in the world, for some reason, I feel like I have to solve the entire problem by myself, no matter whose problem it is. And I'll take that whole load and I'll put it on my shoulders and try to carry that whole load. You ever been through something like that? Maybe some of you are like me in that sense, right? And you try to carry it and solve everybody's problems all at one time. And I said, in the middle of those heavy crises and stuff, that's when I feel the most lonely. Because I isolate to be able to solve problems. I create more problems to solve problems. Who does that? I do. And I said, what happens is by the time we realize we need a life preserver, we're already drowning. I said, so the trick to manage the hard things is to yell for help the moment you fall. Because the moment you hit the water, you're already drowning. And you got to have that life preserver immediately. And so when storms come, where do we go with that? So I want to go to Matthew chapter 7. And in Matthew chapter 7, Jesus is wrapping up his Sermon on the Mount. Now, there's a few things. Matthew 5, 6, and 7, very famous passages of Scripture. You have the Beatitudes come from this. That's how Jesus opens. You have the beautiful passages about being salt and light. He instructs on prayer and fasting. Well, now Jesus has preached this wonderful sermon. And it's potential, like I would lean into this camp, that this was the message when it says that Jesus went about preaching the kingdom, that this is the message Jesus preached everywhere he went in every synagogue. You'll find it again in Luke, but he's actually at a whole different location at a different point in his life, right? Different time frame of the year, different space, different location. It seems to be that the Sermon on the Mount is Jesus' traveling message. This is everything he wants to teach. And so he's teaching all of these things. And in chapter 7, he starts to bring it to a close. And we get to the end of it in Matthew chapter 7, beginning in verse 24. And Jesus says this. He says, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain fell, the rivers rose, and the winds blew and pounded the house. Yet it didn't collapse because its foundation was on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and doesn't act on them will be like a foolish man who builds his house on the sand. The rain fell, the rivers rose, the winds blew and pounded the house, and it collapsed. It collapsed with a great crash. And we come and we pause and go, okay, so storms come, so what do we do? How do we relate to Jesus in this? He's got something to say about it, and he's got something to say about when hard things happen. I mean, he did make this promise to his disciples. In this world, you will have troubles. But know this, I have overcome the world. He didn't say he came to take the trouble away. He says he's overcome it. So when we face it, what do we do with it? So now Jesus is telling us this at the end of his sermon. He's preached the whole thing, and now he's going, if you listen to these words and you put them to practice, you got a solid foundation for life. But if you don't, everything's going to fall apart. And if you go back to what we've been talking about the last 6 weeks with connected and rooted and this whole dynamic of living 6G, where does it go? It all centers back to relationship with Jesus, knowing the words and putting them to practice. And he comes this way. So let's make some observations real quick, like just to pay attention to the text with me, okay? One, it's the end of the sermon. He's preached everything. He's wrapping everything up, and he goes, you're going to find life if you live this out. There's good stuff here. This is the way of the kingdom. So live into it. So it's wrapping everything up. There's no Christians in the crowd. No one in that crowd believed in Jesus as Lord and Savior. No one in that crowd recognized him as the Messiah yet. He's just teaching. He appears as a rabbi. He teaches like a rabbi. He looks like a rabbi. Like he's identified as a teacher when he goes, and there's a certain thing that you would wear town to town. Like rabbis had their own clothes, and you would go, that's a rabbi. People recognize Jesus. So they recognize him as a teacher, so people gather around to listen to what he has to say, because teachers back in the day were like celebrities are today. People cared about what they said, and they valued them. They elevated them. They want to get in the crowd and see them. So now there's this new rabbi on the scene, and he's teaching, and this is what he's saying. And there's no one in the crowd who affirms him for anything other than he's got something to say in that particular moment. So there's religious and irreligious people present. There's really good Jews who are listening to him. There's really pagan idol honoring Gentiles listening to him. There's really poor practicing Jews listening to him, and Gentiles who could give a rip about any idols. They're all there in the crowd listening. So you start to go a lot of times, who's Jesus' audience, people? And people who didn't recognize him as Lord, like it was just different. Like when he started preaching, like people didn't go, this is the one. It took a minute. At the end of this sermon, people were like, that boy can preach. He talks with authority. He's not like these other hymn halls around. He's telling us the truth about something. So they value his teaching by the end of it, but no one believes in him. And you've got a crowd of religious people and irreligious people there. In the teaching, storms affect both builders. So Jesus is talking to a crowd of all kinds of different people, and then he tells you about two different kinds of builders, and the storms affect both builders. Just because one person had this great foundation didn't mean they were storm-free. And because another person had a poor foundation didn't mean that the storms were worse. The storms affected both builders, and it's the same storm. One didn't have a rainstorm and the other have a hurricane. They had the same storm. Jesus describes it the same way. The rains fell, the rivers rose, the winds blew and pounded the house. He uses the same line for both of them. It's the same storm. The size of the house was irrelevant to the message. Like no one's going, well, this is a 1952 Rambler over here. You know, and this one, I don't even know what you call other homes. I just know a Rambler because I learned that when I moved here. You know, this is a 2-story lake house down in Minnetonka. No one compared. The size of the house was irrelevant. The fear of the builder or the homeowner was irrelevant. We have a brother-in-law who lives in Florida, and in Florida they go through hurricane season, and there are certain Floridians who go, we're going to ride this one out. And there are other Floridians who are like, we're going to hit the road no matter what happens. And when it gets to be a certain level, you go get some boards from Home Depot and some sandbags. And then when it gets to be another level, then you go, we're probably going to leave for this one. In the, 10, 15 years he's lived there on the Atlantic coast, I think he's left for one hurricane. Like he's got neighbors that have hurricane parties. Everybody's leaving, let's have a hurricane party. Sounds great. Who's bringing the potluck, you know? And they divide up everything and they hang out together and have hurricane parties. The fear of the builder or the homeowner was irrelevant. Were they afraid of the storm? Did they engage the storm? Were they terrified of the storm? That was irrelevant. And you start to think about those kinds of things to our problems, right? And our situations, like how one person's afraid of it versus another person is irrelevant. The storm comes. You know, so the other thing we get to is like Jesus talks about, like, it's all about my word. You have to live anchored to me. So for all those observations, we can translate those kinds of things into our world, into our problems pretty quickly. We're going to face hardships. It's going to come. They're going to come in all shapes and sizes, and they will rain down and flood our lives, and they will pound against us, and the question goes, what's going to happen at the end? Are they going to overcome us, overtake us, or are we going to be able to stand through the storm? And all through that dynamic, it doesn't talk about like what kind of person you are when it comes to what your Christian background looks like. Do you come from a Lutheran background, Catholic background, Baptist background, Presbyterian background, Methodist background? Did you not have any religion growing up and you found Jesus later in life? That's how I grew up. It doesn't talk about those things. It doesn't talk about the length of time you might have gone to church or served or been on whatever team or committee or board or served. It just talks about like the foundation is Jesus and his teaching. And how do we approach that and how do we live into that when the storms come? How do we live anchored to Jesus? If you've been with Cornerstone over the last few years, I've been pretty open about this conversation, but I am actually clinically diagnosed with depression. I wrestle with it. I go through it. It's something that I am aware of in my life, and you have to walk through, and you just go, how do you engage that space? So we all have these different pieces that where do we fit and fall into these things? When I go through those seasons, how do I stay anchored to Jesus? Because those seasons, they don't come with invitation. They just come. Like, I would love to schedule it, right? Like, on the third week of the third month, Jeremy's going to have a depressive bout, and I'll be good for the year. I would love for that to happen. I would lock myself in a room. I would ask Corey to feed me under the door. I would have lots of chips and my favorite TV show. And just let me be alone for a week, and I'm going to be fine, and then I'm going to come out, and the whole world's going to be okay, right? But depression doesn't work that way. No storm works that way, no matter what it is. It just doesn't work that way. They come completely. There may be some warnings, but they're completely uninvited, right? So how do we live anchored to Jesus in those seasons? One, life is unpredictable, right? Like, we have lived most of our lives in Tornado Alley, and for a season of our lives, we lived on the West Coast in Southern California, home of earthquakes. With tornadoes, and you learn this, right? You get a watch and you get a warning. And sometimes you get an impact. But all the news cycle is like, in this particular county, the National Weather Service has issued a warning for the following counties. And they interrupt everything you're trying to do. And you're like, well, I don't live in that county. Why are they telling me? You know, but they go through a tornado watch, and it's in the top corner of your TV screen. A tornado warning is elevated, and then every 4 minutes, the news guy's coming on and interrupting everything. And then there's a tornado in your neighborhood, take cover immediately kind of things. And we've lived through all those situations in the South. But there's nothing like earthquake time. Even with hurricanes, you get warnings. You can plan parties. You don't plan an earthquake party. The earthquake just shows up to have a party on its own. I'll never forget the first earthquake that we experienced. You could physically feel it. There's rollers, and you can actually watch the ground roll around you, and then there's shakers. We were in a basketball gym, and it was like some cosmic force picked up the basketball gym and shook it like a maraca. And the whole thing was moving, completely without warning. They didn't even stop the game. They just kept playing. And we're sitting there, first earthquake, what's going on? You know, someone stop. Oh, no one else is panicking? Cool. You know? Life is like earthquakes. They're completely unpredictable. They don't warn you when they're going to happen. You just know that they're happening. You can read all about it. You can track the graphs. If you live on that Pacific Rim, you're going to have earthquakes. It's just part of it. They're unpredictable. Life is unpredictable. Right? It would be great if we could just, like I said, schedule everything. If I could just put that depressive week on the schedule, be done with it, good to go. but it often hits me at the time when I least want to feel it, you know? And that's true for a lot of things. A lot of the troubles and the trials that we go through, the hardship, the grief, the loss, we didn't invite those things. It's unpredictable. When we talk about this, the beautiful thing in it is that God doesn't change. And this is why it's so significant to have relationship with God as the foundation of your life. God describes himself as the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. I am the Lord your God, and I change not. Do you know that there are actually gods that other people worship across the world whose mind changes on a regular basis? Eric, you could probably attest to this. If we were good jihadists today, right? If we were a good jihadist today, we wouldn't know the fulfillment of Allah until we saw Allah face to face. And even being a good jihadist, I may still not make it to paradise because of the whim of Allah on that day. It's very confusing. How do you live with hope there? The God of the Bible says he doesn't change. Same yesterday, today, and forevermore. James describes God in this way, that he is the giver of every good gift, in whom there is no variation of change. No variation of change. That makes him completely trustworthy. Someone who changes all the time, you can't trust them. Your emotions, you can't trust your emotions. They're all over the place. You can trust God because he doesn't change. He's rock solid. He's foundation. We think about being anchored to Jesus. God's word never fails. God says this in Isaiah. He says, my words will go out and they will return to me and complete every single thing I set forth for them to do. His word doesn't fail. Sometimes Jeremy fails the Lord's word. Sometimes. But his word has never failed me. When I watch my faith struggle, it's typically me in the relationship. Like if you ever came to me for relational counseling and you and your spouse were fighting, I would go, it takes two to tango. With the Lord, it's me. He is faithful and true. And his word says he is faithful to complete every work he begins in you. From beginning to end, he will finish it. His word doesn't fail. And so we have those kinds of spaces, and that's what allows us to enter into trust. The book of Hebrews, the writer of Hebrews says it so beautifully, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with us. You ever think sometimes like you have that friend and their world is so perfect that they can't possibly relate with what you're going through right now? And I could go across the room and we can pick out all kinds of situations. You just don't know what it's like to lose a kid. You just don't know what it's like to be divorced. You just don't know what it's like to be in a racial marriage. You just don't know what it's like to be a person of color in this country. You just don't know what it's like to be old. You just don't know what it's like to be an immigrant. You just don't know what it's like to be adult and single. You just don't know what it's like to be a kid nowadays. And you're right. And there are times when we have trouble sympathizing with each other, but the writer of Hebrews says about Jesus, we don't have a high priest who's unable to sympathize with us, but one who has been tempted in every way we are, yet without sin. And there are times when we think not that God is irrelevant to us, but that God can't possibly know what I'm going through because Jesus was perfect. Do you know what made Jesus perfect? One, he was God. Two, he faced every temptation that Jeremy faces in his time and his day, yet he didn't sin. Think about that one. Through the power of the Holy Spirit, Jesus in his full humanity didn't sin. yet he faced every temptation that we face. And he knows the hardship of loneliness, of poverty, of rejection, of betrayal, of disease, of grief. We don't ever think about Jesus grieving. Like the man who raised him, Joseph, died. And it seems, because we don't see Joseph on the scene, that Joseph probably died in Jesus' lifetime. Family finger pointing and backbiting. You imagine your mom and your brothers and sisters come up to you and go, "Who do you think you are? Go home." That happens to Jesus in one of his teaching encounters. Who do you think you are? Why are you doing this to Mom? What's wrong with you? Like he's able to relate, sympathize with our weakness in every way. That's what makes Jesus so blasted trustworthy. Like so much a pillar of anchor in our world. If we just pay attention to who he is, it's game-changing. And we will look for all kinds of solutions everywhere else all day long because God possibly doesn't know everything that's happening in our world today. And yet there's nothing that's ever surprised him or shocked him, knocked him off of his throne. Except by his own choice, Jesus left the Father's side to become like us so he can sympathize with us. Not just to be our Savior, but to be our advocate. To know what we've been through and to walk with us through it. So how do we build on the firm foundation? Like the easiest thing I can say right now is you go read the Bible and you go do what it says. Thanks for coming. And that's been said for a long time, right? So let's talk about how we build on this foundation. Jesus says this, like there's two encounters in John. There's two different feedings in John. And what I mean by that, there's two miraculous encounters in two different cities that are almost identical. One was exclusively to the Jews, and one was in a Gentile city. And during that time, you would think these guys would figure it out after a while. But in one of those feedings, they're complaining about not having food, sending everybody away. And Philip continues the conversation. He's like, there's no food, there's no food, there's no food. Jesus says, you go figure it out. You go find it out. And this is what John 6 says. He, Jesus, asked this to test him, Philip, for he, Jesus, knew what he, Jesus, was going to do. The pronouns can get a little bit confusing there. Right? Jesus said, you go figure it out, because Jesus already knew what he was going to do about it. And what Jesus does is provide for everyone who's in front of his face. Not one was lacking. So when Jesus says to trust him and to put his words into action, like he knows the impact and the power and the authority of his word in your life already. Jesus knows that when we live into his word and his way and we live and we learn that, Jesus knows that's the greatest life we could possibly live. Now, will you do it? That's the invitation, right? I've come to give life, Jesus says. What will you do with it? Even in the hard pieces. And so he brings this out. So one, seek the truth. When I'm in those depressive episodes, storms are hitting, all that kind of stuff in my life, I know my feelings will betray you. Like I'm a Star Wars nerd. Also, like we've talked about levels of Jeremy's nerddom. Like I hear the Emperor's voice. Your feelings betray you, young Skywalker. You know? And that's when everything's falling to pieces. And my feelings do betray me. It's like being a Cowboys fan. Like I'm driving with Mary the other day. Mary has a Vikings jersey and a Cowboys jersey. And we watched the Viking lose one day. And she went and changed to her Cowboys shirt. And she put that on. And then we watched the Cowboys lose on the same day. And so she's sitting there the other day. And she's like, Dad, I've got both shirts. Of whom can I be a fan? Hi, Jam. And I said, well, I have one shirt. I have a Cowboys jersey, so I'm a Cowboys fan. I have a Cowboys hat. You have a Saints hat. You know? So that's who my fandom lies with. Like in the World Series right now, I'm a Dodgers fan. They're out, right? I'll cheer for the Twins, cool. I suppose I could cheer for the Rangers, but I really want to cheer against I want to cheer for anyone who's not the Houston Astros. Any team but the Astros. Don't like the Astros. You can't trust feelings, man. They're fickle, just like sports fandom. Everybody, like a couple of weeks ago, yay, Twins! And now it's like, who do we cheer for now? Because everybody's got losing records in Minnesota right now. What do we do? You cannot trust your feelings. You have to know the truth. And not what you feel about the truth. What is the truth, And so we lean out. We got to confess unbelief. I think about the man on the roadside. He's begging Jesus to move and heal his son. And Jesus says, I can do this. Do you believe it? And he's like, I believe, Lord, but help my unbelief. And how many of us are willing to look God soul to soul and go, God, I just don't believe you. Help me. You say this. Everything in my life says that. Help my unbelief. God's not going to cast you away. He's going to build you up. He's going to show you the truth. He's going to walk with you through it. He's going to affirm his place as the sympathetic high priest who never changes, who can relate with you completely and lift you. But sometimes I'm so afraid to tell God where I struggle with my faith, I just get stuck there. Confess the unbelief. It's not disbelief. Disbelief and unbelief are two different things. Disbelief is complete rejection. Unbelief is a struggle. God, I want to believe. Help my unbelief. Confess the unbelief. Share with your faith community. If you don't have a faith community, this is why being in relationship with other believers is important. This summer, Jeremy and his two fishing buddies that we go out, one's Joel, one's Dave. Within like a 2-week span or a month span, Joel and Dave both lost parents. And while being on the boat, I lost my grandmother a year ago, and I'm still wrestling with pieces from that. And we were able to enter into that space and encourage each other because we know what we're going through. We've been in those spaces. And to be able to share with a faith community is significant. Even if they were going through something different than what I've gone through, I can still be with them and their life hurt. 2 Corinthians, Paul tells us that we should look to comfort others with the comfort that we have found. It doesn't mean you have to enter into the same place as the other person or exactly know that. Like, there is stuff, to be quite frank, there's stuff that some people in this room have gone through I hope I never go through. I may. My heart breaks for you. I don't say that to be callous and uncaring. I care for you. I pray for you. I grieve with you. And yet you know some pains that I don't want to know. I don't want to know the pain of losing a spouse. I may one day. I don't want to know that pain. I don't want to know the pain of losing a child. I may one day. And I watch you. I pray for you. But I'm grateful that for at least the peace I get to be in your community. And there are others, some of you are completely isolated from community. We're in a room, we're all watching one way. But to be in relationship with other believers, there's something about that. And that faith community is huge, especially when it comes to the storms that we face and how we anchor to Jesus. They help us with that, right? And then last is to wait on the Lord. And this is the hardest one. David in Psalm 27, it's one of my favorite Psalms. David is walking through his life, and he talks about how his parents rejected him. He talks about the troubles that he's facing. He talks about how God is going to be his shield of deliverance. And then at the end of it, he goes, but wait on the Lord. Have courage and wait. The most courageous thing we often have to do is to wait on God to do something. And so we wait. And that waiting doesn't mean we're waiting for the life preserver to come. It may mean that the life preserver is around us and we're still in the water. We're not going to sink. but we haven't been pulled out of the water yet. And I wait. I wait for God to move. I wait for God to heal my grief because he's healing it. I wait for God to build my unbelief because he's building it. I wait for God to calm my emotions so that the truth can shout and resonate. And he does. But in all of that, like, we go, storms come, now what? And over the next 4 weeks, we're going to keep building on this foundation of hope because God is good. In just a moment, we're going to take communion. Our worship team's going to come back out. If you don't have the elements, our ushers are here. As we take this time, enter into a space. Enter into a space. Where is God? Where is my soul being attacked by the storm? And how do I need him? I'm going to take just a moment of silence as you think through that. When we take communion, communion is a celebration of who God is and what God has done in the world, but that work isn't over. We're reminded by Paul that we should do this as often as we gather, and when we gather, we shouldn't take it in a manner that is unworthy. That unworthy manner is a statement of belief. Am I in a right relationship with God through Jesus? When I take communion, it's confession of trust. Jesus says to eat his flesh and to drink his blood, and it's an affirmation that we're not finished yet. When Jesus instituted this with his disciples, he says, I won't do this again until we're together in my Father's house. Paul says to do this as a reminder until the Lord returns. It is a statement. It is a statement that Jesus is with us, especially in the hard times. Because as long as we take it, there is still sin, there is still suffering, there is still shame, there is still sickness, there is still sorrow, there is still death, and one day they will be no more. And we won't take a cup, we will feast on that day. But until that day comes, be reminded. Communion is an act of remembrance that tells us that Jesus is for us.